Welcome to Reinventing-U. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman. I believe that in today's world of ever-constant evolution, the only career change that matters is when what you do matches who you are and what you believe. This show is where you'll learn how embracing change and reinventing yourself will help you navigate any disruptions and lead a life of happiness and fulfillment, especially in this ever-changing world. Your purpose and your meaning will drive your personal transformation. As I like to say, it's your vision, your life. Be passionate about it. Reinventing-U starts now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reinventing-U, the podcast where we talk about all things career-related. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman, and today we're going to talk about how to cultivate a leadership presence. I came across a quote recently from Arlene Rankin, who's an esteemed professor of psychology. She said, "The way in which we think of ourselves has everything to do with how our world sees us and how we see ourselves successfully acknowledged by the world." I believe that a lot of what happens to us, in particular to women in the corporate world, revolves around that kind of thinking. So to dive deeper into this issue today, I've invited a very special guest, Elizabeth Bachman. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm thrilled to be on your podcast.
And I'm thrilled to have you here. So for everybody, Elizabeth is an executive coach and a presentation skills trainer. Yes, there is such a thing. And Elizabeth is the go-to person for advanced level training in speaking, presentation skills, and leadership. Elizabeth has spent a lifetime perfecting the art of presenting, and she helps high-level clients show up as a leader who should be followed, who should be promoted, who should be hired, and getting the recognition that they deserve. What I find most about you, Elizabeth, is that you spent over 30 years as an opera director, working with such luminaries as Luciano Pavarotti and Plácido Domingo in more than 50 operas around the world. Elizabeth is fluent in 5 languages, and you bring your global experience and wealth of tools to help business professionals become respected presenters. You help them rise to valued positions within their company. So I'm thrilled to have you here, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
Well, after that quote that I just read, what comes to mind when you hear that?
Well, it actually, so many things come to mind, but one of the things that really struck me about it is how we are seen and acknowledged has a great deal to do with how we feel about ourselves. Everybody says you're great, or everybody says you're terrible. Mm-hmm. You can't help doing that. And even if you know on the inside that you're not what they say you are, it's still going to affect you. On the other hand, one of the things that I see a lot, often with women and with scientists, I work with a lot of tech people and scientists. I see people who don't think they're so great, or who have been conditioned, socialized to say, well, good girls don't brag. I don't know if your mother said that, Danielle. My mother did. Yeah.
Said other things, but
yes, a few other things.
To the same.
Yeah, but basically, everybody else thinks you're great, and you say, yes, but I'm not that special. And learning how to accept your own strengths and what are the things that you do better than anybody else that they're easy for you, so you discount them. Mm-hmm. Learning how to recognize that and recognize that that is a strength, and then figuring out how to talk about it is a very large part of the work that I do.
Mm. It's interesting because it does happen a lot, I think, to women in particular. And you're right, scientists as well, and tech people who are not necessarily used to speaking in public. They're in their little bubble, right?
Well, the people who are really happiest sitting at their computer.
Yes.
And then they have to be out there when they have to talk to other people, or talk in a meeting don't show up with all the brilliance that they actually have.
And the interesting thing is that the more you rise in the leadership, the more opportunity, the more it becomes necessary.
Yes.
To do that speaking, right?
Well, you have to be able to speak. It's everything from how do you show up in a meeting to whether you're speaking in public or speaking to clients, or maybe you're at an upper level and you have to talk to the board. You have to do a presentation to the board. One thing about hierarchies, I was talking to a client the other day, and who had some very young, some employees who were right out of college, who don't understand the value of hierarchy. And hierarchies can be a not so great thing, but they're actually useful. It's useful to have a hierarchy so that you know who's supposed to talk to whom and who do you report to, and that the people at the upper levels depend on the lower levels to talk accurately about what they've done. And one of the things that I find in employees is that we know what we've done, but if we don't tell anybody, no one's going to recognize. You think the manager is, of course, going to know that you did all this work to fix the onboarding process, for instance. The manager's not necessarily going to notice that. So you have to be able to talk about it, to recognize that what it is, that this is an achievement, and talk about it without bragging. I call it walking the tightrope. You have to walk the tightrope between respected and obnoxious.
Okay, without becoming too obnoxious. Now, obviously, there is a correlation, a very, very deep connection between having those presentation skills and leadership. So given your vast experience in this area, can you tell us a little bit about this connection and why it's so important?
Well, basically, it's how do you show up? Leadership involves having a vision and then convincing people to go with you and telling them why it matters and what they're supposed to do. We've all had managers who were say managers but not leaders, who didn't give clear instructions. So if you don't know how to be clear about what to do, or I could talk more later about hinting rather than asking, but where you don't get clear instructions, and so you don't work efficiently and you don't get the work done because you don't know what it is they actually want you to do, and they may not know. How you present that in terms of clear instructions or what's expected as a leader, and how do you show up as someone who has ideas and is willing to bring the team along with them. All of that is part of a leader. Executive presence often means something else. So, and that's something that I learned working with the opera companies and working with the opera singers, is how do you walk into a room in a way that people notice you? How do you look confident? Of teaching a young singer how to walk out on stage and do a good audition when inside they're terrified. We've all been there. How do you do that? And executive presence is partly how you show up and partly how you have trained the people around you to think about you. One of the things that I've learned, too late for me running an opera company of the glass ceilings that I hit on my way up, but I learned that you can change the way you're perceived by changing the way you communicate, shifting the way you communicate to where people then start turning to you as the subject matter expert, the person who's going to know.
Right. So communication has everything to do with how you're perceived.
It's all communication.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just said it's all
Okay.
communication.
All communication. So I'm curious to know how you got to this point where you have such a deep knowledge of speaking, presentation skills, leadership. What brought you to this, to doing this today, to helping
Well,
executives, people
I
in management?
like to think that I've been devoted to the art of great communication since I first walked on stage at the age of 5.
Wow.
And I was 5 years old. And afterwards, I heard my mother say that I was the best damn bunny rabbit ever to grace the stage of the hillside school. And I was hooked. I thought, whoa, they like that. I went from So I was going to be a famous actress on Broadway. And I went from acting to directing. Turns out I was a better director than I was an actor, and to directing opera singers. And that's where I found my artistic home. And I did that for 30 years, including the last 11 of those years running an opera company in the Austrian Alps.
Oh, wow. And so you
yeah.
switched from that to now doing what specifically?
Well, I had thought about, I thought like a producer, like a business person running the opera company. That really,
Sure.
I learned a lot of ways not to be a boss. So, sometimes the bad boss was me. And unfortunately, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Maria. But we muddled through.
Yeah.
And I was also training speakers for the last 5 years or so of that. And what I discovered was that with the opera, I was beginning, I was working a lot with young singers. And with young voices, it's the same 20 arias over and over and over again for 30 years. And so I thought it was becoming work. I was in serious danger of losing the ability to be moved by the music. And so I thought I'd better stop now, get out while I can. And meanwhile, I was training speakers, and that wasn't the same art. It was different. I learned something from every speaker. What I've discovered now is that I've put it all together in the work that I do, especially the Visible and Valued program, where I help people show up as the person who should be promoted and learn how to ask for a promotion, to show up as somebody valuable. So visible and valued.
That's the name of your program.
That's the name of my program. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Now we work on the two separate spectrums of the spectra, I should say, of the career world, if you will. I work with people who are interested in moving on to another industry or another organization, etc. And you help people stay where they are because they love what they do. But they often find that there's something that's going on that's not quite right. So what is it exactly that you help these people with? How do you talk to them? What is it that
I really do is help people who do good work and are good at what they do, and they aren't listened to. They're ignored. There's a wonderful woman named Alison Aubrey who talks about like communication between men and women, and she draws the parallel of, as a society, we are geared to celebrate the firefighters. The firemen are going to come and put out the fire. But nobody talks about the people who actually installed the sprinkler systems and made sure, that the stove wasn't burning. So, yay, you've got the firemen who rescued everybody. But meanwhile, the house is burned down. The family's homeless. Maybe somebody died. Or you've got the nice, quiet person who did everything right, so there wasn't a problem. And one of the techniques that I talk about, I don't know anybody else who talks about this one, is how do you show the value of things not going wrong? And that involves recognizing what you're good at and then And then working with a partner, say a coach like me or an accountability buddy, so that someone who's not going to let you say, yeah, well, I did that. That was easy. To say, wait, no, that's important.
Mm-hmm.
So it's how do you talk about, it's basically how do you tell strategic stories, talking about what you do and what you have done in 60 seconds, 90 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
but you can drop seeds of what you're good at. And when people hear it enough, then that's how that shifts the perception. It's the same thing as say, a product placement in a movie. You know, if you think about how many movies you are where if they're on a computer, they're on a Mac, or they're on an Apple, because Apple has sponsored them with
Right.
the subliminal message that if you're on a computer, you should be using an Apple computer.
Right.
There's actually a lot of money behind that. In this sort of case, we seed our value with stories, and we are the product. And because we are our own product, our skills and such, that's where it really helps to work with somebody else, because nobody can really be objective about what they're good at. You've got to have outside eyes who can say, okay, that's interesting, not terribly interesting. But this other thing, the one that you just glossed over, let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do when I help people through the interview process, because it's also all about stories. And very often people will say, oh yeah, but it was just my job. Yeah, but gee, it's more than that, right? A lot more than that. Yeah. You hinted at something a little while ago. You said, you know, when do you ask for something as opposed to hinting at something? Can you talk a little bit more about that? And, you know, what does it mean, and why do people do it? Why do women do it in particular?
Well, this one seems to be a gendered quality. There are a lot of qualities about the communication between single focus thinkers and multi-focus thinkers, which could be men or women. Hinting rather than asking is because somewhere our foremothers, with all good intentions, tell us don't ask, don't be greedy, don't ask for what you need. If they know you need it, they'll give it to you, hopefully. And so they drop a hint, and that can really get people in trouble. And it's so much a part of a way we are taught to speak that most people don't recognize when they're doing it.
And it seems to me when we drop hints like that, and I have to say I've been guilty of it myself, I almost feel as if I'm being manipulative a little bit.
Really?
Yeah, it's like, you know, just come straight out and ask, you know, and the answer will be either yes or no, or maybe something in between.
Well, and maybe it's because we're afraid of somebody saying no.
Very possibly. Very possibly. So, Elizabeth, why is it a problem to hint rather than ask?
The thing is that hinting, the other person may not actually know that you've asked something. So, and yet, as girls, we are often taught that not to be greedy. And so you sort of drop a hint, and then you hope somebody will pick it up. And the thing is that if the other person doesn't pick it up, then people get angry. And so, for instance, my client Maria, this was some years ago. Maria was fairly high up in a software company in Silicon Valley, and she wanted a promotion, and she wrote a fabulous proposal for her boss, Jason, about what she would do in the new position. This was her vision for the department in the new position. And then she sent him this proposal that she'd slaved over, but she didn't actually say, I'd like to talk to you about a promotion. She just put in the subject line, here's something that will interest you. So that's a hint in writing. And Jason, of course, you know, Jason gets 50 emails an hour. So he saw it go by and he said, okay, I'll get back to that. And then, of course, he didn't. And Maria waited and waited and waited. And a week later, she said, "What did you think of my proposal?" And Jason said, What proposal?" And Maria, because she was trained to never say anything directly, said, "Oh, it's not a problem. I'll send it to you again." But inside she was furious because she was convinced he hated her. This is another gendered thing between single focus thinkers and multi-focus thinkers. Multi-focus thinkers often take things personally. You'll take a no personally and think that because somebody said no, they mean they don't like you. The technical term for that is relational thinkers. So if you're somebody who thinks in terms of your relation to the people around you in a web, then indeed a no is a no to you personally. Jason wasn't saying no to her. He just missed it. She said, "It's no problem." And so he said, "Oh, okay, no problem," and immediately forgot about it. And Maria was furious. She was convinced that he hated her. She talked to her friends, other women, who said, "You're right. He hates you. How dare he do that to you?" And she was ready to quit. And fortunately, one of the friends knew me and said, "Talk to Elizabeth first." And I talked to her and she said, "He hates me. He's never going to give me this promotion." And I said, "Did you actually ask for the promotion?" And, "Oh, no. He knew I wanted the promotion, but no, she hadn't actually asked." So she resubmitted the proposal after having said, "I'd like to get this promotion. I think I would be great as the director in charge of this department." And they made an appointment to talk. It went very well. Jason was thrilled. He thought it was wonderful. And she got the job and has since risen very high in that company, where she's very visible and very valued. And the thing that breaks my heart is she was ready to quit over a misunderstanding in language. And that gets to the heart of what I do. Having lived and worked internationally since I was 17 years old, I'm used to working with people in multiple languages where maybe we're all speaking our second or third language.
Mm-hmm.
I pay a lot of attention to how things are said or how you can be understood in an international situation. And nowadays we're in a very international business world. So how can you make yourself clear and understood if you're speaking your second or third language, or it's the second or third language for your audience? And that's culturally as well as the words you use.
So how does this help people in leadership positions? How does it help them with their presentation skills?
Well, one of the things I learned from the opera singers is to have good diction, pronounce it right. Ooh. And so for leaders, if you're presenting to an audience, a multinational audience, be clear, be specific, stop at the end of sections, give people a chance to hear what you have to say. If it's something really important, say it twice. The other thing to notice is that in conversation, be aware of what the norms are in the situation you're going to be in. So I ran an opera company in Austria. We were in the state of Tyrol, between Innsbruck and Munich, and it's fairly informal. But I was still very careful about whether I used the du for the informal, for you informal, or sie you formal. In Vienna, it's a lot more formal, and you're always going to say sie. And on the other hand, German speakers who come to work in America, they often get pushback from the American teams who think that they're rude and dictatorial, because in America, North America, please and thank you are so woven into our language that you say please all the time. A couple times, every couple minutes or so, you're going to say please, or you're going to say thank you. When it's not there, people interpret that as you being rude. And yet the German language doesn't work that way. So when I was, my opera company was a bilingual opera company for Americans and English speakers and German speakers, mostly with helping young singers get a chance to work on it. And one of the first things I did at the beginning of every rehearsal period was to say, Americans, be aware that the German language doesn't use please and thank you as much as American does. So it's just the way the language works. And my German speaking friends, they often think that the North Americans are wimps. Say, why do you have to use all these extra helper words? Just say, do it. You don't need anything more than that. But the North Americans consider that an order, and then they resent it. It's knowing things like that that can help you at how you present yourself. That's all presentation skills, all how you present yourself.
It's interesting because in a global world, that happens a lot, and we learn about that everywhere. I mean, every type of cross-cultural communication has some sort of, not just the ones you've explained, but sometimes just the body language also is different. We talk a lot about that between the Japanese and the Americans.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
And some Africans as well. I remember going to a course in Bethel, New Hampshire, where one of the participants was from Nigeria, I believe. And as he was standing and talking, he was standing looking down, and he had his arms crossed. And all of the Americans in the room thought that was very rude, because crossing your arms means you're
blocking yourself off.
Blocking yourself off. And luckily, they allowed him. They weren't mean or anything, so he was able to explain that where he came from, that was a sign of respect. So right. It's pervasive through all of the communications that we have, and we're constantly going to come across people from different cultures, different countries, different languages.
I think the heart of what I do is the miscommunication between single-focused and multi-focused. It is another language. And what I find is the stereotype is men speak one language, women speak another language. Yes. Men are single-focused, women are multi-focused. Now, we know this is not that, it's not really an either or. I know plenty of women who are single-focused. You have to be to rise in an organization these days, because Western business was built by men on single-focused principles. So you can be single-focused on that. The multi-focused people, as I said earlier, are the relational ones. They're the ones that are going to notice the side issues, such as before we put all this time and money into building that new app, are you aware that our competitors already have it on the market? Might yes. not be as cute as the one, or as pretty as the one that you want to make, but there's one that's out there. We're not going to be able to sell it. That actually happened to a client of mine. Ingrid was fired from the project because this new app was the baby. It was, the beloved idea of the senior vice president. And so he removed her from the project, and another team built it. And she was over in the corner saying, no, stop. No one's going to buy it. And sure enough, nobody bought it. So it was thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours down the drain. That's actually a cultural reference. Useless. I won't necessarily say down the drain, because nobody wanted to notice, because of tunnel vision. Single focus is great because that's how you get things done. But the downside of that is tunnel vision. Multi-focused is great. The downside of that is, if you're a multi-focused person talking to a single-focused person, you might give lots and lots of detail and context, which the single-focused person doesn't care. They just need to know, is this a problem I need to solve? And I think of it as two different languages using the same words. It's as if the single focus people spoke Spanish and the multi-focus people spoke Italian. And if you're going to speak Italian to a Spaniard, they'll understand the gist of what you have to say because the languages are very similar. But for anything important, you're going to want to hire a translator.
Yeah, for sure. It's the first time that I've known about this difference, but I've never heard it called single focused or multi-focused. So I think that's very interesting and very interesting to recognize it in yourself. So that just leads me to ask, how much is a self-awareness important in this whole conversation?
Everything. That's the basis of everything.
Yeah.
First of all, you have to know what your triggers are, how you think, but then get out of your point of view and put yourself in the shoes of the others. I have a technique I call strategic empathy, where it's rule number one for any presentation, whether it's a conversation in a meeting or a speech to a lot of people. Rule number one is make it about them, what they care about. Put yourself in their shoes, and then address that. They don't care how you got to your idea. They want to know why it matters. And that actually has to do with executive presence as well. Is if you are nervous when you're giving a presentation, this is the same sort of stage fright I helped singers through. And I have been there walking out, giving a speech and noticing somebody important in the front row. And my mind goes,
There too, so
yeah, we have all been there. Everybody does that.
Yeah.
The thing about the nerves, the voices in your head, is most of the time they're saying, well, they're going to say, oh, they're going to think you're stupid. They're going to think you don't know what you're talking about. They're going to think you're going to forget everything and you're going to look stupid to them. It's all about what your voices think they're going to think. But the truth is, you can't know what they think. You can't be in their heads. They might be there because they're interested. The fact is, if they showed up at all, they're interested in what you have to say. So make it about them. Why should they care? Why do they need this information? And then it's as if your information is a gift. I like to think of it as, here's an image for everybody who's listening.
Yeah.
Imagine that you are giving a dinner party. You've got a dinner party for people that you really love, and you've made a fabulous dinner, and you're going to welcome them into your space, and they are your guests, and your information is the dinner. And then your best information, or if you have a request, hire me or buy my product or whatever it is going to be, that's dessert. So imagine walking out of the kitchen into the dining room with carrying a fabulous cake that you've baked, and the look in their eyes as they go, ooh, wow, you are the gift. Your knowledge is the gift. So if you can get out of your own head and focus on them and what they need, that usually takes care of the nerves.
I love the analogy. I mean, who wouldn't want a beautiful dessert?
Right.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a beautiful analogy. Elizabeth, we're going to take another break and move on to other things. So we went from talking about cross-cultural miscommunication, if you will, to working on one's nerves by thinking about the gift that you're giving other people. What are some of the biggest language confusions that you see within organizations, since we were talking about languages?
The one that I find most is really the women think that men don't listen to them, and men think that women don't get to the point. And again, that's a stereotype. It comes from centuries of patterns, and we know that those stereotypes are breaking down now. We recognize there's a whole spectrum. That's why I like to think of it as single focus thinkers and multi-focus thinkers. Yeah. What the single focus thinkers need to know is how important it is for the multi-focus thinkers to be acknowledged and to recognize that. Multi-focus thinkers, and this is the one that I see happens over and over and over again, is multi-focus thinkers can hold lots of ideas in their head at once, and they may come back to something 2 hours later, but they'll remember it. The single focus thinker thinks on one thing at a time, which is good, that gets things done. But the multi-focus thinker will then come into the person who's focused and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about about this project. And the single focus person says, yeah, sure. Basically interrupted. They don't like to be interrupted. It's easier to be focused. The multi-focus person thinks they've been heard. The single focus person has, of course, forgotten, and the multi-focus person gets angry. That's what happened to Maria with Jason, that story. The key is to go to the single focus person and say, I need half an hour of your time to discuss this project. When would be a good time? So make an appointment.
Yeah, don't do it on the run in the middle of a hallway.
Exactly. Make an appointment. And then the gift of that is that when you have that appointment, then they'll be single focused on you. So you'll have their complete focus. Then don't waste their time. Come in and tell them what they need to know and why. You can have your details and context as a backup, but start out, think bullet points. That's why we use bullet points now. It's a way to keep the information, let people take the information in a way that they understand. The other thing for the multi-focus person is make the appointment and then shut up. Don't keep talking, because the tendency is to keep on talking. And that just annoys the other person. Make the appointment and then wait. It's the first few times to do that, that's really hard. So I've been there. The single focus person, when that happens, has to be able to say, I'm sorry, I can't think about that right now. Let's make an appointment. Could we talk about it at 4:00, for instance? If the single focus person can acknowledge them, say, yes, I heard you, and I can't deal with it now because I'm focused on something else. Let's find a time to do it. The multi-focus person is heard, acknowledged, which is very important to the whole taking things personally part.
Mm-hmm. So which people do you seem to work more with? Are they, is your client base mostly multi-focused people or single focused? I imagine they both have communication issues. Both, but more multi-focused than single-focused, because single-focused people, you have to be single-focused to rise in an organization. So at least if you are situationally single-focused, the problem when people aren't being heard is when it's a multi-focused person. Most often it's a multi-focused person trying to talk to a single-focused person who doesn't hear them or who doesn't understand why this matters, because the multi-focused person is giving the whole context.
as long as the single focus person knows that context is everything, details are everything, they can, you can bear with it a little bit. But it's just like speaking Spanish to a Spaniard instead of speaking Italian. Tell them something, what they need to know, why they care, why it matters, and so that and what they're supposed to do about it.
I was going to say they often need a solution.
Yes. What do you want to do? And the other thing, this seems to be a gendered thing, is that men are socialized, boys to solve problems. This is a problem I'm supposed to solve. So the multi-focus person should tell them if this is, they recognize they're going to be thinking about solutions. So then you say, this is something I'm going to need action on. I have to give you 2 pieces of background before we get there, but this is going to be thinking about this in terms of action, or this is an update on a program we're following. You don't need to do anything right now. And now let me tell you what's happening. It basically allows the single focus to relax, to know what they're listening for, because they hold one idea at a time in their heads.
Now, what about women's tendencies to not want to toot their own horn, for lack of a better term?
Yeah.
Because very often, in addition to being multi-focused, I find that women are sometimes shy about their qualities and their achievements. And
this is Good Girls Don't Brag. And so here's a historical perspective for you. I like to think in historical perspective so that I don't watch the evening news and think it's all happening for the first time and despair. We've had centuries of men controlling the money, men controlling the power, protecting women, because women were the ones who have babies. Women had to stay home with the babies. And until effective birth control came along, women really were mostly stuck at home taking care of the child care and the family. Men were not taught to take care of that part. Men's job was to protect the women. Now, since the 1970s, women are taking an equal place in business because daily life does not revolve around strength. It does not revolve around warfare, mostly. It revolves around how do you think, and that's where you have both people. The key is you need both. But because of these centuries of tradition, it's passed down. I don't think anybody does it on purpose. I think you sort of learn it through society, that girls are not supposed to ask. They're not supposed to be greedy. They're not supposed to be forthright. In a way, girls are supposed to talk like the Japanese, where something is implied rather than stated. And so the boys are taught to get to the point. So boys won't understand it if the girls aren't getting to the point. And this whole thing about not talking about how good you are is girls are also punished for bragging. So you have to walk a fine line between talking about what you're good at, then you acknowledge the team, but don't leave yourself out. And so much of history has trained us to just be helpful and be quiet in the background. And the thing is that if you are helpful in an organization, if you're the helpful person who solves problems and stays in the background, somebody else is going to step into that vacuum and claim the credit for the work that you've done. We've all lived through that.
Absolutely. And so how is it possible to show our achievements without bragging?
Well, I have a program I called Seeding Your Value with Stories. You drop seeds, and basically what you want to do is keep track of your goals, whatever your goals are every week. You may have in your company, you set out your goals once a week, and at the end of the week, you talk about what you've done. Often it's an email, it's a 1-paragraph email. The key is track it on a document. Do it in a document first. And then once a month, go through your goals and see what you did, see what worked, see what worked, what didn't, what are you proud of, and write a story about it. So I can say I've lived and worked internationally since I was 17 years old, and that has given me the gift of listening for the way people speak and noticing when people are being understood or not, and also learning to speak with an awareness that the other person might not be following me because of the language barrier. So I could talk about that, which is a gift that I got from the years of the opera company. Now I use that to help others. It's not exactly bragging, but it's talking about something I'm good at.
Is it only women who encounter this sort of thing, or
mostly women? No, most women and the introverts.
Okay.
The experts, there's something also called the expert trap, which is another piece of this, which is talking about how you got here, because you're so excited about what you do that you give more detail than you need to. That's not necessarily, oh, it was nothing, I didn't have anything to do it. That was, and this is so cool because da 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 da, and your listener is completely lost. So it is actually the same pattern for different reasons. Again, but it come back to, why should they care? You don't want to do too much how and not enough why.
That's very interesting. Wow. What other things do you see come up most in the work that you do?
It's a combination of learning how to talk so people can hear you and recognizing your value. And there again, the Visible and Valued program is a group mastermind for exactly that reason, is that girls are trained to collaborate, whereas boys are trained to compete. That's another stereotype, but it's a lot of it. So little girls are trained to work in a group, and your relation to the group is very important. So if you have a group of peers who are saying, yes, go for it, do this, you can, then it's easier to move forward because you know you have the support of the group. You don't have to be all alone. And you shouldn't have to do it all alone.
Well, no, in today's world of complexity and uncertainty, we don't really talk about competition very much. We talk about co-opetition, so cooperating with your competition, which is another kind of skill. What strikes me is I'd love to know your sense of whether or not the kinds of things you're talking about are actually changing within organizations today.
They are. There are many, many organizations where where people skills are emphasized, and how important it is. And since the pandemic, since people got used to working from home, we're still working out as a society what the world of work looks like. We're still, it's going to be a few years before we settle into a norm again. Yes, it's working. Yes, it makes a difference. And one of the things that has been proven statistically is that companies with diverse leadership, so being a leader is very important. Diverse voices in leadership have better profits. They have a better return on investment. They have less employee turnover, because if you've got people leaving in droves, it's expensive to find new employees. It's a employee turnover and churn is expensive. So you have a better return on your investment. And when I first started talking about this, they were talking about getting women on boards, and the statistics were that companies with diverse leadership had 19% better ROI. 3 years later, it's 33% better ROI. So there is a difference, and it is making a difference. Things are changing.
It makes total sense. I mean, you hear about group work when everybody has the same background and they know the same things. There is nothing much that gets done.
Yeah.
It advances fast. So it just makes total sense. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth, I know you have a podcast as well, and you share your insights on that podcast, in those podcasts. Is there something that stands out for you, a favorite episode or something that resonates with our topic today that you'd like to share?
Well, you asked me about leadership presence, and I have an episode. It's actually a series of 3 or 4 shorter pieces about what is executive presence and how do I get some.
Wow, fantastic. So how can people? And
you can find that on you could find it on my website, which is elizabethbachman.com/podcast. Oh, cool. And hopefully you'll put it in the show notes for this podcast, which will be the quickest way.
For sure. Elizabeth, one final question. What sort of advice would you give people today who really want to move into leadership positions?
I would say get a partner, get allies, recruit some allies, and learn how to know what you're good at, how to talk about it, and what do the people who make the decisions care about, and can you solve their problem? But don't try to do it alone. Do it with somebody, especially somebody who's trained like you and I are, so that you have outside eyes to help you.
Very important. Yeah.
As the saying goes, you can't see the label when you're inside the bottle.
That's a very good one. I've never heard it before. Excellent way to end. And I also want to point out your slogan, when you want to make a difference, not just a point. I think that really resonates. It resonates with me, and hopefully it resonates with a lot of our listeners. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming today and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you, Danielle. It was an honor to be on your podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Reinventing-U with me, your host, Danielle Silverman. Tune in on the 2nd and 4th Monday each month at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com. Join me and feel inspired and optimistic about your future. We only get one life, so embrace change and thrive with me. Find work that aligns best with your soul and what you enjoy. For more information, go to reinventingyou.com.